Japanese monetary policy is very, very important. And its financial and regulatory structure, national, or in the case of Europe, regional regulatory framework has to be strengthened. And no country, and in particular the center of the world economy, should not run an unsustainable current account deficit. Now, the international financial architecture should be strengthened. Perhaps we should talk about two aspects. The IMF, the role of surveillance on the part of the IMF. In particular, the IMF was very weak in providing a surveillance of systemically important economies, like the US and Europe. Not only conducting surveillance, but also urging these economies to take proper corrective policies to avoid crises. The G20 decided to establish the Financial Stability Board by transforming the Financial Stability Forum into a more powerful organization. Many people doubt whether this Financial Stability Board would become an effective organization. I think it's very essential for the US and UK, where financial services have been playing dominant role, very important role in the economies. These countries make very strong commitment in supporting the FSB, Financial Stability Board, in strengthening global supervision and regulation of financial institutions, financial products, and markets. Now, for the IMF to become really effective, this governance reform issue is quite important. In my view, the IMF is almost monopolized by the United States, by Europe. Europe has a large representation at the IMF. The US has the only voting power, is the only country that has a veto power. And managing director of the IMF has been traditionally a European. So this has to change. In particular, from the Asian perspective, not many Asian economies, Asian countries, have the sense of ownership over IMF. The IMF is owned by somebody else outside of Asia. I think for the IMF to be effective, that sort of perception has to change. So Europe's voting power should be reduced substantially. Maybe I should go as far as 10 percentage points. The US should not have a veto power. For that matter, any country, any single country. And if the next managing director comes from Asia, I think Asians would start feeling that the IMF is now changing. Now, Asia's policy agenda. Mr. Kolb talked about rebalancing of growth. I think it's very important for Asians to think about this growth rebalancing issue rather than relying on external markets and exporting to the US and Europe. And given that their demand is going to be very weak over the medium term, it's in the interest of Asian countries to try to stimulate domestic and regional demand, and Asia becoming not only the world producer, but the world consumer is a very important change. So I think many Asian countries do need a demand-side policy to stimulate consumption, and for that matter, in many countries, social sector protection is an extremely important policy. Although it takes time, but clear commitments on the part of governments to strengthening social sector protection would be quite important. Supply side measures like increasing productivity of non-tradables sector, and also stimulating the green sector, energy efficiency, clean energy, environment, and so forth. These are extremely important. And also for manufacturers, of course, trying to target US and Europe would continue to be important. I think that's where Asia's comparative advantage and absolute advantage lie. But now growing markets are in Asia. The middle class people are rapidly emerging in China, India, and ASEAN countries. And this is also another source of demand. From that perspective, regional market integration is quite important, and also regional financial architecture has to be strengthened. Now, regional market integration is quite important because many Asian countries' producers have to really take a look at Asia as a whole as a market, rather than its own country as a market. So from that perspective, there are many FTAs going on in Asia, but there is no Asia-wide FTA, and trying to create an Asia-wide FTA is a very important step. So for that, the beginning would be a Japan-China FTA, or what Japan calls the Economic Partnership Agreement. Japan-China is absolutely essential to create a ASEAN plus 3 FTA or ASEAN plus 6 FTA. But maybe the immediate step would be a Japan-Korea FTA. And the financial market integration is another important aspect because of the need to mobilize Asia's massive savings for Asia's investment through good financial systems. Now, regional financial architecture is quite important to support rebalancing, growth rebalancing. The reason is that when we talk about growth rebalancing, Asians should reduce current account surpluses. But many Asian countries feel uncomfortable in reducing current account surpluses. Many Asian countries do not want to go to the IMF at a time of crisis. But if there is a credible reserve pooling arrangement in Asia, like an Asian Monetary Fund, then Asian countries would feel more comfortable in running less current account surpluses, smaller current account surpluses. So now the Chiang Mai initiative under multilateralization is heading towards de facto Asian Monetary Fund because of the creation of a surveillance unit by the end of this year, which is a de facto secretariat, and also a panel of advisors, which is de facto board of executive directors of ASEAN plus 3 for the Chiang Mai initiative. So the de facto Asian Monetary Fund is now emerging. And on top of that, what we call ADB and ADBI call Asian Financial Stability Dialogue. This is a dialogue, this is a regional version of the Financial Stability Board at a global level. At the regional level, financial authorities should get together and talk about financial systemic crisis issues and also financial sector development. Let me conclude my presentation, Asian leaders should argue at the next G20 meeting the following 5 points. Asia has done much in macroeconomic policy response, both monetary and fiscal policy, and even financial sector support, even though the financial systems in Asia are essentially sound. Asia is the first region to get out of the crisis. To maintain stable global finance, advanced economies, in particular the US and Europe, would have to strengthen financial supervision and regulation. The IMF needs to establish reputation and credibility by focusing on effective surveillance of systemically important economies and by implementing substantial and not marginal governance reforms. And advanced economies should give the Financial Stability Board full political support and adequate financial resources and expertise to ensure that it carries out its new mandate. And finally, regional financial architecture in the form of an Asian Monetary Fund, Asian Financial Stability Dialogue, should be an integral supporting component of a new global financial architecture. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dean Kawai. You covered many the important issues, macroeconomic imbalances, and so you touched on this rebalanced growth and financial architecture, international financial institutions, governance system, and so forth. But here I think we need to discuss further is there is the close link and the relationship between the international financial architecture and this rebalanced growth. Because if you take a country like Korea or any of the small open economies, the only insurance at this point is just accumulating very expensive reserves. So that's why we need, at the global community level, we need adequate financial architecture. And to complement that and to supplement that, we need a regional level financial architecture. And even before that, where we need this bilateral arrangement as well. In fact, when we had the false rumors in our foreign exchange market last year, the year before, and we had the swap arrangement with the US Fed solved the problem. So this bilateral arrangement with major industrialized countries, a central bank, and their neighbors, the arrangement has also helped. This, in my view, this bilateral swap arrangement, the least costly arrangement, because you don't have to borrow, because itself, having the arrangement itself is insurance. So this kind of thing. And then, in addition, the regional level cooperation. In that regard, I fully agree with this Chiang Mai initiative, the expanded, multilateralized, and expanded. And also, eventually, I would like to see that evolve into a full regional monetary facility, provided the mode of operation should be consistent with the international financial architecture. Otherwise, I don't think it can be ever established in reality. So there we have to really devote our time to how to make this regional level architecture consistent with international architecture. That's another issue, and resolving the global imbalance issue, and we worry about the chronic deficit country. What that means in the global macroeconomic terms, there are countries, globally chronic surplus countries. So you have to solve both sides. And so in that way, you want to have the domestic demand, supported growth. But countries like Korea, unless we have this very firm bilateral and the regional level, the global level architecture, then if you stimulate domestic demand, that automatically lead to current account deficit because we rely 100% imported oil and raw materials. So to stimulate consumption, you need a foreign exchange. And where do you learn? Either you learn from export, or that's why I think your service sector should be liberalized. So you have to have deregulation and all these things put together. And on these issues, I think we have really very intensive the discussions among policymakers and academics. But anyway, you touched on the most important issues here in limited time. And now let me ask Mr. Lee to present your views.
Well, first let me thank the organizers of the Jeju Peace Forum for inviting me to join this very distinguished panel to discuss the very important ongoing financial crisis. Well, my previous two speakers were quite wide in the scope of the coverage of their speech. Let me be relatively focused on one particular issue, that is the international monetary system. I call it the future of the international monetary system, a Chinese perspective. I call it a Chinese perspective partly because this is the outcome of a research project for the Central Bank of China, and also I'm a member of the CPPCC, the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, which is kind of like a House of Lords in England, right? Counselors to the government. However, in this presentation, I strictly representing my own views. Now, people are asking, next page. People are asking about the, next page, please. Oh, how do I? Oh. Okay. Yeah. After the financial crisis, people are asking about the fundamental root problems of the financial crisis. In this regard, one particular system, that is the international monetary system, cannot escape our exploration. Okay, so in this short presentation, I will talk about the three things, basically. The first, the world economy before the financial crisis. Very, very quickly, I go through the basic features of the world economy before the financial crisis, and also the international monetary system before the financial crisis. And then, second, I talk about the problems with the international monetary system before the financial system, and then I talk about possible reforms and the possible changes in the near future to the international monetary system. So first, what are the important features of the world economy before the financial crisis? Very simple. Three important features. First feature is that we have seen accelerated GDP growth, especially among the emerging market economies. The numbers are very, very clear, okay, which I don't have to read out, okay? And even faster growth is the growth of trade in the world before the financial crisis. So as an outcome, the ratio of trade volume to GDP has been increasing over the years, leading to financial crisis. And together with the trade, we have seen financial deepening. That is, in countries after countries, the volume of financial transaction or the size of financial market relative to GDP has been increasing. Now, as a result of the faster economic growth in the period leading to financial crisis than the periods before, and financial deepening, we saw very rapid accumulation of sovereign wealth among emerging market economies, including countries like China and Korea. And so these are the features of the world economy before the financial crisis. What are the features of the existing international monetary system? Again, there are three interesting noticeable features. The first one is that the US dollar US dollar at least was the king among central bankers before the financial crisis. As you can see from the chart, the central banks put on average 65% of their currency reserves in US dollar assets. And this ratio increased from around 50% in the late 1980s. Part of the reason of the rise of the US dollar in currency reserves is the collapse of the former Soviet system, and together with that, the Eastern European countries, because these countries used to use convertible rubles. Now they are all on all individually independent central banking system. Each of them is needing foreign currencies to back up their monetary system. The second feature of the monetary system leading to the financial crisis is the rising euro. Euro in the past 10 years has been rising in two regards. Number one is the share in international bonds and notes transactions. As you can see here, around the year of 2003, the euro took over the US dollar in becoming number one in the international bond and notes issuance. And in the second area, euro also took over the US dollar. That is the trade, international trade, settlement of trade. Euro took over the US around 2003. The third feature of the international system leading to the financial crisis was the very important impact of the US dollar monetary policy in the world economy. This chart, this is one of my favorite charts showing to my fellow researchers and students. This chart shows us the relative, the monetary condition, of the U.S. and the events of financial crisis before the current one. Okay, as you can see here, when the U.S. dollars, when the M2 of U.S. dollar to the size of U.S. GDP goes down below a certain level, towards the average level, then in the emerging market economies, we are very likely to see financial crisis. In fact, the Asian financial crisis of 1997 and 98 happened when the M2 of US dollar to GDP was very low, was the lowest in recent history. So the US monetary condition is extremely influential in affecting the world economy. We also run several sets of regressions and to explain the world economic growth. One of the very important variable to explain the world economy is the U.S. monetary condition. So in other words, the U.S. monetary condition is extremely important in shaping up the world economy. And arguably, which I will show you, this is unfair. And also, we show that when the U.S. monetary condition is very loose, then we're unlikely to see financial crisis in emerging markets. To the contrary, when the U.S. monetary condition is very tight, then a current account deficit in an emerging market economy is much more likely to lead to financial crisis than when the U.S. monetary condition is very loose. So these are the problems, and so these are the features of the international monetary system so far. So what are the problems? Number one problem of the current international monetary system, obviously, is a problem of incentive incompatibility. That is, the U.S. monetary policy is so important for the world economy and for the financial security in other economies. Meanwhile, the U.S. monetary policy is mainly dictated by American domestic political conditions. So here we have an incentive compatibility problem. Monetary policy makers in the U.S. are mostly concerned about domestic economic situations, whereas the monetary policy in the U.S. has international implications. The second problem of the current international monetary system is its non-sustainability problem. That is, we argue that the current system cannot continue, is not sustainable. Why? because the U.S. creditworthiness after the current financial crisis is a big issue. And there are many ways to document this one. One of them is the diminishing share of the U.S. economy in the world GDP, as this chart shows. The other one is the government balance of the U.S. And the low rate of savings in the U.S., as this chart shows. Another one is, of course, is U.S. federal fiscal deficit, which is now accumulating very rapidly. So all these things show us, indicate the non-sustainability of the current international monetary system. In fact, I personally am very worried about the events in the coming month in September, when the financial market becoming more active than it is, when the investors coming back to work. It's likely for us to see U.S. dollar crisis, that is U.S. dollar depreciating against major currencies in the world, which will give us another round of shocks in the financial market. And yet another sign of another piece of evidence of non-sustainability is the U.S. creditworthiness in its holding of foreign long-term securities. In fact, in this regard, the U.S. is a deficit country, is a net debtor country. Okay, and the third problem with the current international monetary system is a perceived unfairness. Notice perceived. Many people in the world argue that it is unfair for the U.S. government to monopolize the seigniorage from being the international currency. Okay, so there are many ways to calculate that. Here, I only show you one Chinese author's calculation of the seigniorage of the U.S. dollar being the international currency as a share of U.S. GDP. Now, the numbers may be incorrect, may be inaccurate. That's not my point. My point is that there are many guys who are out there arguing that this is unfair. So these are the three problems. Number one is incentive incompatibility. Number two is non-sustainability. Number three is perceived unfairness. So what are the options of reform? Or rather, what are the possible direction of evolution of the international monetary system? Well, I think there are three possible directions of evolution. Number one is perhaps the world may go back to some kind of gold or commodity standard. For example, when we go back to a gold standard or silver standard, or when we go back to some kind of commodity, 30 commodity backed currency standard, well, I think this option, this direction, this possibility is actually very low, because there are problems with this kind of system, because the world economy is expanding quickly, so apparently the supply of gold is not enough. Also, if we go back to some kind of a commodity standard, then the producers of these commodities will have disproportionate amount of control over the international money, in the future international monetary system. Is also problematic, okay, politically. The second possibility is for us to see a multi-currency anchored system, for example, a US dollar, euro, Japanese yen, and possibly maybe Korean won or the Chinese yuan. This is, to me, most likely outcome, most likely direction of evolution of the future of the international monetary system. That is, multiple currencies involved, and these multiple currencies, like 3 or 4 currencies, become the major currencies in which international financial assets are issued, are traded, and currency reserves are invested in, and international trade are settled in. And also, if this system evolves, then there will be a need for the sovereign governments issuing these currencies to coordinate closely with each other on many issues such as exchange rate and reserve management, as issues mentioned moments ago by our previous speakers, such as issuers of these currencies may negotiate with each other to back up each other's countries' reserves, to minimize the possibility of balance of a payment crisis. So this is the second possibility. I think this is the default plan. This is the default plan of the future of international monetary system. Well, the third possibility is much talked about in recent months, especially in China. China's central bank governor Zhou Xiaochuan proposed that the world needs an international currency which is beyond any individual country's control. In particular, he mentioned that there's a need to beef up the special drawing rights as a currency in the world. Well, in order for these reforms, for the SDR reform to be realistic, right? I think at least two things to be done. Two conditions have to be satisfied. Number one is economic and financial. Okay, as already mentioned by Governor Zhou, that there's a need to increase the size of credit allocation of SDR, and this is partially been done by the last G20 summit in London. We've seen an increase from $340 billion to $600 billion. The other thing another thing in the economic and the financial area is to enlarge the financial instruments denominated in the SDR. Currently, very few financial instruments are issued in SDR. Now, as I'm speaking, there are already IMF debts issued in SDR. It is not unlikely for major countries like Russia and China to issue sovereign debt in SDR. I don't think there are technical problems in this regard, and mainly political problem, which I will mention in a few minutes. Okay, and the third thing in the economic and the financial area to be done is to enlarge the number of currencies in the basket of SDR. Currently, there are only 4 currencies in the SDR as the backup currency. In order for the SDR plan to be politically appealing, apparently more currencies have to be included. There are plans to have 20 currencies to be included in this new SDR plan. The fourth thing in the economic and the financial area is to enlarge the scope of transactions in SDR. Currently, SDR is only used for governments to settle their deals. And there's apparently in order to SDR, for SDR to become an international currency, more private transactions have to be settled in SDR. Well, all these 4 things are in the economic and the financial area. To me, more important is the political things. Okay, so at least the 2 things have to be done in order to SDR reform to fly. Number one is to implement substantial IMF reform. Why? Because the IMF is the controller, is the issuer of SDR. Okay, if the IMF is still, as my previous